Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Microjourneys. My name is Liam Sturgess, and this is a show where we go on little adventures of learning and discovery of new ideas we perhaps hadn't contemplated through the lens that we try to contemplate them through. Now, that song that we just listened to for our introduction was super cool. I woke up a couple days ago to find a notification. I had been tagged in a Substack post by Babbling Bee Rye. And this fantastic musician, Babbling Bee Rye, had done a mashup of my song Soulful from my album Foreverland, which I've played on this show a couple episodes ago. So he mashed it up with a song called STS9 a song called Atlas by STS9, which I wasn't familiar with, but I am now. So thank you, Babbling Bee Rye, for making that awesome mashup. It was very impressive how he did the loops and, his body overlaid in different, thirds of the screen. I've always wanted to learn how to do that. So maybe this is my wake-up call. So the link to that video is in the description. Do me a favor and do Babbling Bee Rye a favor if you enjoyed it. Go click that link. Go watch it again in full and hit that like button and subscribe to him. Now, what are we doing here today, ladies and gentlemen? Well, I put out a report on the 16th called Kids Help Phone Digitizes Mental Health. And I put that out on my Substack on Microjourneys, which you can go to at liamsturgess.substack.com. And if you want to follow along as we go through the presentation today, then you can do that. All of the references, all the source links, every bit of information that I've gleaned is all linked up in there. And finally, before we begin, that is the best way to support the show. Become a paid subscriber to the Microjourneys Substack, and you keep this investigative journalism independent, as with the music. So let's jump in, ladies and gentlemen, because this, I think, is a very prescient and perhaps alarming, or not prescient, what's the word? Very of the time, and a very alarming story. So here's what happened. So on July 5th, 2023, Kids Help Phone, which I'm sure you've heard about, nonprofit organization. It's like a crisis hotline for kids and young adults and such. Okay. So they announced that they were deploying artificial intelligence to help respond to the enormous need as more and more young people reach out for mental health help and support. From the article by the Canadian Press, published on CTV News, the planned AI will be able to recognize keywords and speech patterns from young people who reach out to Kids Help Phone to help busy counselors zero in on what they need and tailor their support accordingly. Now, why are the counselors so busy, you may ask? Well, sort of obvious, I suppose. The 24/7 national support line for kids and adults has had a huge rise in demand for its services since the COVID-19 pandemic began. After receiving about 1.9 million calls, texts, live chats, or visits to its website during 2019, Kids Help Phone has seen that number jump to more than 15 million since 2020, according to numbers provided by the organization. Now, according to the article, the organization is already using some AI technology to help triage texts. Whether they do this by text or by voice over the phone, the idea is that the AI will catch on to keywords and phrases indicating someone is at particularly high risk of, for example, harming themselves in the very near future. And this allows cases to be prioritized and the most pressing situations addressed the quickest. Now, it makes sense in theory, but as my partner Sam pointed out to me when we both first heard about this story over the radio, she asked, why does this need to be something that AI does? And, well, the answer is beyond working as a prioritization system, it also allows for the identification and classification of various types of mental illness, disorder, or personal crisis. As it says, the Kids Help Phone AI tool will use natural language processing to identify keywords or trigger words that correlate with specific types of issues. If a young person uses a specific word in their communication that is correlated with or connected to a specific issue or concern, it will be flagged by this model and it will alert the professional staff, Sultan said. For example, AI can be trained to recognize words that suggest a possible eating disorder, allowing a counselor to turn the conversation in that direction and offer up specific resources and supports. AI can also be trained to identify new words and trends related to situations that are causing distress and anxiety, such as a pandemic, climate change, wildfires, or a mass shooting. Okay, so I'll give you the wildfires because truly, depending on where you live, the last few weeks, the last few months have been very hard on people forced to evacuate their homes due to the fires. And this has happened all over Canada, particularly in the east this time around. And and of course, the smoke hasn't been great either. As my friend Kristen pointed out, she said thanks for that. And of course, I have to remind people sometimes how large Canada is and how very much not in Quebec I am. But the smoke has been bad. But the rest of it, the framing of most of these issues is very strange. The framing of a pandemic or climate anxiety or mass shootings in Canada? Now, furthermore, the artificial intelligence company in question can be squarely blamed for contributing to this anxiety using the very same AI they're now offering as the solution. So, let me introduce you to the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Now, the Vector Institute is a Canadian not for profit organization based in Toronto, Ontario. It was launched on March 30th, 2017, with an initial funding package of over $255 million from a variety of public and private organizations. Now, a notable founding funder of the Vector Institute is the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, or the CZI, a philanthrocapitalist fund set up by Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan with a mission to end all diseases by end of century. Other notable funders from 2017 to present include, let's see, we've got Accenture, Air Canada, Bank of Montreal, Bell, Boehringer Ingelheim, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, or CIBC to us Canucks, Canadian National Railway, Deloitte, Deep Genomics. Now, put in the chat if you're starting to recognize why some of these are at least notable. Google, the Government of Ontario, the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System, or OMERS, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Roche, Royal Bank of Canada, TD Bank Group, Thomson Reuters, and the University of Toronto. Additionally, the Government of Canada provides a significant amount of money to the Institute through the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy, or PCASE, dispensed by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, and the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. Now, let's talk about COVID, because you better believe that the Vector Institute was very busy during the declared COVID pandemic, 2020 through 2023. Now, on April 12th, 2020, for example, the Vector Institute announced it was repurposing high-performance computing NVIDIA graphics processing units to contribute to the Ontario Ministry of Health's Pandemic Threat Response Platform, or Panther. This would, quote, enable processing of large amounts of data spanning Ontario's vast universal health system, allowing for deeper insights on critical issues such as risk of spread to vulnerable people asymptomatic transmission and outbreaks, allocation of resources such as tests, ventilators, staffing, localized social distancing and closure policies, and stabilization of supply chains for ventilators and PPE. All of which are things that were universally either completely the wrong policies or the wrong equipment to be implementing, the wrong kind of public health response, the wrong kind of in hospital procedures. These guys had a hand in all of it. But of course, it was the AI that did it. I digress. On April 16th, 2020, pharmaceutical giant Roche announced the launch of its Roche Data Science Coalition, which included the Vector Institute as a collaborator, in order to work, quote, with the global community to develop solutions to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, of which there were many, of course. Moving right along, they had a very busy April. On April 24th, 2020, the Vector Institute held a webinar titled Innovating Through COVID-19 Digital Contact Tracing While Preserving Privacy, mytrace.ca, during which they launched a contact tracing application called MyTrace. It was led by Alan Aspuruguzik, a University of Toronto professor and faculty member of the Vector Institute. Now, another participant in the webinar, drumroll please, was Ashley Tweet of the Dalalana School of Public Health. Now, you may or may not be familiar, but Tweet did some serious feather ruffling, if I may, in April 2022, when she published a study in the Canadian Medical Association Journal titled Impact of Population Mixing Between Vaccinated and Unvaccinated Subpopulations on Infectious Disease Dynamics, Implications for SARS-CoV-2 Transmission. She and her co-authors, David Fisman and Afia Amoako, used a, I'll say it, fatally flawed statistical model to argue that people who had not received a COVID-19 genetic vaccine, labeled the unvaccinated, were a danger to those who had received one of these products, the vaccinated. Yes, it was as confusing at the time, if not a bit infuriating. Moving on, as we mentioned already, the Vector Institute participated in the development of that MyTrace track and trace application, but they had to shut it down in June 2020 when the government of Canada announced COVID Alert, its own national contact tracing app brought to you by the same folks that gave us ArriveCan. We all know how well that worked out. For the record, the company was called GC Strategies. Now, fast forward, on September 16, 2021, the Vector Institute announced a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy for all staff, contractors, and visitors. The policy went into effect October 1st, 2021, with those in non-compliance denied access to the facility and threatened with termination. Very similar language, very similar coercive stick leaning measures in order to try to get people to take this shot, very familiar language in here. It makes one wonder if they were sort of drafted by the same association or so on, and then disseminated for community use by those who required them. I'm just speculating. All right. Now, a Vector Institute researcher named Bo Wang contributed to the development of a separate platform, a digital genomics platform called Viral AI, described in the press release as an AI-enabled genotyping tool that can analyze viral genome data from a nasal swab. It's not just viral genome data that it can analyze. Viral AI was created under the leadership of DNA Stack, a precision medicine software company, and the 5.4 million Canadian dollar Government of Canada funded COVID Cloud Supercluster project. Sounds impressive. But That was a while ago, and that's a lot of money, and COVID's over. But don't worry, all that money did not go to waste. According to Wang, their tool could be repurposed for any other virus, like the common flu. There you go. Now, a PhD student working in Wang's lab named Hassan Man worked on a similar project called the COVID-19 genotyping tool. One of his collaborators was Samira Mubareka, who allegedly, story goes, participated in the isolation and sequencing of the SARS-CoV-2 virus from the very first COVID-19 patient in Canada, way back in March 2020. So Samira has come up many times in my research. Very interesting. On February 11, 2022, the Vector Institute published a study titled Using AI to Help Solve the Long COVID Puzzle, describing how Vector applied natural language processing, or NLP techniques, to over 460,000 Twitter posts by people who had self-reported long COVID to see if any patterns or signals would arise amidst the social media noise. Now, just to point out, this natural language processing that they're talking about having done here to analyze everyone's Twitter feeds is the same natural language processing that they are now talking about applying to your kids when they call Kids Help Phone with some very personal information. Now, let's talk about Mars Discovery District, which is where the Vector Institute is headquartered. Mars is a public-private partnership in Toronto, Ontario that funds companies that, quote, streamline our healthcare system, reduce the effects of climate change, unlock new cures for disease, envision the jobs of the future, improve mobility in crowded cities, and provide food and clean water for a growing population. Sounds rather noble. So who funds the thing? Well, public-private partnership funding for Mars has come from a variety of sources, including Amgen, AstraZeneca. Get my logo wall coming up. There it is. Yeah. So Amgen, AstraZeneca, Cisco, the City of Toronto, Deloitte, the Consulate General of the Netherlands in Toronto for some reason, Eli Lilly, GlaxoSmithKline, the Government of Canada, Government of Ontario, Janssen and its parent Johnson & Johnson, MasterCard, Microsoft, Novartis, Roche, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Toronto Stock Exchange, and the University of Toronto. Now, there are many interesting companies that have found themselves either based at or funded by Mars and its subsidiaries. The way it works is it's an incubator, so it has different funds that it itself, brings companies into its portfolio or gives grants and so on, but it also works as a place where you can go and, incubate your company as a tenant. For example, the aforementioned DNA Stack is part of the Mars Investment Accelerator Fund portfolio. But there's some other interesting ones. Here's one you may not know about. It's called Blue Dot, an outbreak intelligence platform, which claims to have been the first company in the world to detect the outbreak of COVID-19 in Wuhan, China, 9 days prior to the World Health Organization sending out their first public warning. And you'll see there's a lot of firsts. A lot of these organizations we're going to look at claim to be the first to have done something that wound up being tremendously relevant to COVID. So other tenants, Merck once set up shop there, and so did Public Health Ontario, which I find very interesting. Just imagine Public Health Ontario, who set a whole and enforced a whole bunch of public health policy related to COVID, being down the hall from Merck, who had a number of pharmaceutical products all on patent that, would have been nice for one of them to be off patent and the other, take it or leave it, I suppose. Just my opinion. But another of these companies, another in Mars Discovery District's portfolio that is of particular note, is called Deep Genomics, an artificial intelligence drug discovery company founded in 2015 by Brendan Frey. Now, there's a number of people who I hope are either watching this currently or will watch this later, and at this point are getting a little excited. For example, JJ Cooey or Mark Kulak or Gabe or Matthew Crawford. and some other people who have been paying attention. So Brendan Frey, the founder of this group, would also go on to become one of the co-founders of the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence just 2 years later. So keep that in mind. The commonality is not just that they're based at the Vector Institute, or based at Mars Discovery District, I should say. They have the same co-founder. Okay, so what is deep genomics? Well, it's, as the story goes, the result of a personal struggle in Frey's life, having been told that his unborn child suffered from a genetic defect. This led him to seek to transform medicine by applying the hot field of deep learning to genomics. In September 2019, the company announced that it had, quote, made the first ever discovery of a disease's treatment and drug candidate using artificial intelligence. Now, this is a remarkable claim, in part because of the timing. And moreover, its very close proximity to the launch of a very similar program in the United States. Dubbed Discovery of Medical Countermeasures Against Novel Entities, or DOMAIN. This Defense Threat Reduction Agency, United States Department of Defense funded project published its first white paper just 3 months later. 3 months after Deep Genomics claims to have done something very similar. On December 11, 2019. Describing its ability to identify threat mechanisms of action, drug targets, and drug candidates in response to biological warfare agents or accidental pandemic events. Domain was deployed by one Dr. Robert Malone the very next month, after he received a call from one Michael Callahan in Wuhan, China, telling Dr. Malone he should spin up his team or get his team spun up. And this resulted in the identification of a number of drugs that may respond to this novel SARS-CoV-2 virus, and those were remdesivir, famotidine, otherwise known as Pepcid, and ivermectin. There was one other one, but I'm less familiar with it. So I thought that was rather interesting. And as has been pointed out by Mark Kulak, this was a Department of Defense program that most likely, it seems highly unlikely that it was in fact December 2019 that this program really started to spin up, so to speak. It was very likely classified for a while. So what we have is deep genomics and domain simultaneously. You could call it convergent thinking. Some might speculate there's something else, but at a minimum, we can describe it as convergent thinking. And tremendous foresight. Now, it gets crazier, because on October 26, 2021, Deep Genomics announced that Tal Zaks, chief medical officer at Moderna, had joined the company as an advisor. Of course, this is after the COVID-19 genetic vaccine products by Pfizer and Moderna, as well as AstraZeneca, Janssen, so on and so forth, after the deployment of these products. But I still think it's notable that after the fact, Tal Zaks of Moderna decided that this company was worth his attention. But he's not the only one, because some other notable advisors and team members include Peter Barton Hutt, former chief counsel for the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, and current board member of Moderna. You've got Steve Jurvetson, an early investor in Elon Musk's SpaceX, Tesla, and The Boring Company, the latter of which is digging holes under LA and producing flamethrowers, which that's pretty cool, if you ask me. But you've got a Elon Musk guy. You've also got Art Krieg, formerly of Pfizer. You have Mark Edbrook, formerly in charge at AstraZeneca of their work with Moderna. And finally, you have Jan LeCun, chief AI scientist at Facebook. Excuse me, I have to scratch my nose. I think I have allergies to conflicts of interest. Possible conflicts of interest. But remember, this is still this story. That's all very interesting, but we're talking about Kids Help Phone. So we know their partner is sort of strange. But what about Kids Help Phone? It surely does a great service by giving children, youth, and adults alike an outlet to share and be heard in times of emotional and psychological hardship. I don't want to downplay that. But the idea of a company, an artificial intelligence company like the Vector Institute, deploying to process such intimate information being given to them by these kids and young adults is truly unnerving, particularly given their proximity and relationships with so many people and companies whose disastrous actions and contributions and guidance over the last few years have caused so much suffering, especially to this age group. So, who funds Kids Help Phone? Good question, Liam. Well, let's go through some more logos. Kids Help Phone, over the years, in recent years, in fact, has received funding from a variety of organizations with direct interest in how the COVID-19 pandemic was responded to. So, we've got the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, which I happen to know is itself funded by AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and our best friends at the Rockefeller Foundation. You also have Cisco, Facebook, the governments of Canada, Manitoba, New Brunswick, the Northwest Territories, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. You have Johnson & Johnson again, London Drugs, TikTok, Twitter, and Walmart. Now, the fact that TikTok is funding a mental health service for children and youth is an upsetting thought, given that the social media app appears to be playing an outsized role in royally messing up, the psychological well-being of this exact age group. You can find plenty of articles with headlines like these: teens turn to TikTok in search of a mental health diagnosis, teens developing TikTok tics. But equally scary is that several of Kids Help Phone's donors are subsidiaries of a company called Tencent, which is a Chinese corporation that owns WeChat, a messaging application infamous for its use by Chinese authorities for mass surveillance of its citizens. It's often described as a core piece of China's social credit system, and, according to Elon Musk, is exactly what he wants to turn Twitter into. And of course, just so happens, Twitter is another funder. So again, what do they do during COVID? Well, let's talk about this. In December 2020, the Toronto Star reported that Kids Help Phone, as we've already sort of heard here, was receiving more than double the number of crisis calls compared to 2019, primarily driven by isolation. I quote, "The main driver of calls," Simon said, "has been isolation, with calls related to loneliness up 50% from pre-pandemic rates. Others have been reaching out with concerns about missed milestones like prom and graduation, and some expressed self-esteem and body image issues earlier in the pandemic. But not to worry, children. A solution is just around the corner. Ah, yes, you're feeling isolated, alone? Well, this is our shot to be together again." So, at the end of April 2021, a campaign was launched called "This Is Our Shot." Described as a national grassroots movement aimed at replacing vaccine hesitancy with vaccine confidence, the campaign moved swiftly to promote the COVID-19 vaccines, which were quickly being offered to lower and lower age cohorts. As you see, a number of Canadian celebrities joined in, including Ryan Reynolds, Michael Bublé, Clara Hughes, Roberta Bondar, and Chris Hadfield. Now, all proceeds raised through t-shirt sales through this campaign went to support Kids Help Phone, ending in December 2021 with a big ol' $111,839 check. Now, they describe it as grassroots, but I'd say grassroots is probably not the most accurate word to use. As described in that Toronto or City TV article, The organizations behind the campaign included the South Asian COVID Task Force, 19 to 0, the Latin American COVID Task Force, Black Physicians of Canada, Canadian Muslim COVID-19 Task Force, Sikh Health Services, which I believe is an indigenous group, and Black North Initiative. So you've got a good range of, I suppose, minority representation or special group representation. But let's zero in here because, first of all, 19 to 0 is an out and out behavioral science campaign, otherwise known as a nudge program. And as I have previously reported, this program is funded by a range of organizations that are the absolute opposite of grassroots. For example, Alberta Innovates, an agency of the government of Alberta, gave 19 to 0, just shy of $400,000 in September 2020 for a project titled Changing COVID-19 Behaviors through a data-driven targeted marketing campaign. Now, I'm sure the close financial partnership that Alberta Innovates has with Pfizer had absolutely no bearing over this funding decision. Now, also, the Government of Canada provided 19 to 0 with multiple federal grants across the last several years, specifically to combat vaccine hesitancy, including the more recent $480,000 from the Public Health Agency of Canada's Immunization Partnership Fund for a project titled Reinventing the Critical Role of Schools in Building Vaccine Confidence Across Canada. Yes, lots of trained vaccinologists working in those schools, so I understand. Then, of course, there's the fact that 19 to 0 is funded by Moderna and Pfizer directly. Something that the organization decided to remove from its website during the This Is Our Shot campaign. Other funders of note include Alberta Health Services, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, GlaxoSmithKline, Hill and Knowlton Strategies, a popular PR firm, Sanofi, Shaw, Merck, the Ontario College of Pharmacists, and the Universities of Calgary and Toronto. Grassroots. But what about this? The other groups, let's see, the South Asian COVID Task Force, the Latin American COVID Task Force, and the Canadian Muslim COVID-19 Task Force, as it just so happens, are all partners of 19 to 0. Let's look at just one of them. The South Asian COVID Task Force also describes itself as grassroots. But once again, the task force partners are themselves heavily funded by the governments of Canada, Ontario, and Toronto, such as is the case with the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. Then you have Anju Anand, the founder of the South Asian COVID Task Force, who also co-founded the This Is Our Shot campaign. So there you go. All right, well, all of that said, we must ask, who contributed to the $111,000 big paycheck paid out by the campaign to Kids Help Phone? Let's do it. Let's take a look. Well, you have companies actively working on the widespread introduction of vaccine passports and digital ID platforms, including Accenture, IBM, and MasterCard. You have Canada's biggest airlines, including Air Canada and WestJet, who also developed their versions of, COVID-related passport travel restrictions along with those prior companies. And you also have the Toronto Pearson International Airport and the Greater Toronto Airport Authority. You have various government-directed public health and government-funded healthcare organizations, including Alberta Health Services, Bayshore Healthcare, Cleveland Clinic Canada, Hamilton Health Sciences, and Unity Health Toronto. You have big tech giants, including Amazon, DoorDash, Facebook, Google, Hewlett-Packard, Spotify, TikTok again, Twitter again, and YouTube. You had Canada's primary financial institutions, including the Bank of Montreal, Canadian banknote, who, by the way, quite literally prints our money, CIBC, the Royal Bank of Canada, Scotiabank, and TD Bank Group. You have the Boston Consulting Group, whose role in the global COVID-19 response includes the co-development of New York State's Excelsior Pass and helping establish remdesivir as the standard of care, so it would seem, for COVID-19 in hospitals across the United States, thanks in part to the now infamous Jordan Tristan Walker, who co-authored the paper in question. You have the business councils of British Columbia and Canada, who collectively represent Berkshire Hathaway, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, Janssen and Johnson, JP Morgan Chase, McKinsey and Company, another consulting firm that continues to appear throughout levels of government. You have Meta Platforms and Pfizer. Also, the Canadian National Railway, which, if you didn't know, is owned in large part by Bill Gates through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust and Cascade Investments. You have pharmaceutical giants, including GlaxoSmithKline and Merck, as well as Innovative Medicines Canada, which is a national trade association representing AstraZeneca, Emergent Biosolutions, Gilead Sciences, developer of remdesivir, Medicago, Novartis, Pfizer, Purdue Pharma, Roche, Sanofi Pasteur, and Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Takeda, of course, manufactured some of, I believe it's Moderna's, could be Pfizer's, products, and many others. You also have media giants, including the Globe and Mail, the Post Media Network, Rogers Communications, TELUS, the Toronto Star, and Verizon. You have professional associations, including the Ontario Medical Association, the Convenience Industry Council of Canada, the Neighbourhood Pharmacy Association of Canada, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, the Ontario Trucking Association, and Ontario's universities. You have Rexall, which is one of Canada's largest pharmacy chains, and just a whole bunch of others, including Science Up First, a similar behavior change initiative, TC Energy, trying to build the Trans-Canada Pipeline into the States. You have University of Calgary, Manitoba, and Toronto, as well as York University and Walmart. I think I've made my point. So look, in conclusion, Kids Help Phone, their decision to integrate artificial intelligence into its services, will allow it to not only screen, capture, and categorize highly sensitive health and other personal data on each caller, but also seeks to actually take on some of the tasks of the physician. No matter how powerful an AI language processor is, its proposed use will inevitably lead to incorrect diagnoses of things like eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and gender dysphoria, based on the biased parameters of the programmers and their operators. And hey, glitches happen with humans too. But nonetheless, nothing can replace the in-person relationship between a patient and their doctor, cultivated over the course of months and years. This trust that you build. Key words as a basis of diagnosis is utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. Children in distress will use whatever language feels most appropriate, whether they're being completely earnest or they're misguided or just lying. It'll be all of those things at a given point. And regardless, Kids Help Phone and the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence are both organizations whose funding partners have plenty of financial motivation to harvest, use, and sell this private data to people and companies with no interest in the well-being of that child or young adult who's calling in for help. Now, as I said before, I have absolutely no doubt that Kids Help Phone does a lot of good for a lot of people. But if they're as enmeshed in this fourth industrial revolution, digitize everything, computers will decide all mindset, as they appear to be based on my fairly cursory analysis, then perhaps it's time to step up as members of the community and seek to shift some of the burden being put on Kids Help Phone, shifting it onto our own shoulders to assist our friends, family, and the youth of our community in need, instead of allowing them to be caught up in this mass push towards complete, total, and permanent digitization of well-being itself. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you no matter where you came from, if this is your first time watching or if you've been following me since my days not too long ago over on Rounding the Earth. I appreciate you watching very much. Thank you to Gabe, who's been contributing wonderfully in the chat. I'm just going to read his comments. Seems like a strange way to close the loop. Manipulate public, then harvest the data when they reach for help, gain more insights on how to manipulate them, which I think is a tremendous example of one of the really sort of obvious ways in which this can be taken advantage of. And it's been done. It's done all the time. We don't have to assert that that is happening now with Kids Help Phone. It doesn't matter. The point is, when you put in a system that allows someone to take advantage of that for whatever reason, whether it's the collection of the data on its own, or it's simply the ability to, aim the person calling in a given direction, or it's both. We got to remember what the point of these services is and ask if they are still set up to be able to do it in an unbiased way. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Again, the best way to support the show, liamsturgess.substack.com, where you can go become a paid subscriber to the Substack. Of course, you can subscribe for free, though if you want access to the premium content that I occasionally do behind the paywall, in particular, if you want things as early as when they come out, then that's the best way to do it. There's no world in which I lose my independence. It's not an option for me. So the only way that I can continue to do this sustainably is if you help me do it through your financial contributions. I should come up with I should have that Bernie Sanders meme. I'm once again asking for your financial support. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been Liam Sturgess. I hope you are having an absolutely fantastic day, and I look forward to seeing you whenever it is we cross paths again.